Hello plant lovers, and today I thought we'd take a little look at the Australian native orchid Sarcochilus. Here's a picture of mine in bloom last year, and this is the plant. This one I think is Sarcochilus hartmannii. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm terrible at such things. So this is one of the pretty basic earlier versions of this orchid. It's now been hybridized a great deal, and some amazing versions that have come out in the last sort of 5 or so years. Incredible colors. But I thought we'd just talk about basic care because they are so easy to grow and they are such a beautiful orchid, requiring so little attention and care, so not fussy, so not high maintenance. You should give it a go. So let's start with the basics. First of all, the Sarcochilus are lithophytes, so they cling to rocky surfaces, and they grow on the east coast of Australia, largely sort of northern Victoria, all the way up the coast, depending on the species. Some of them grow to reasonably high altitudes, and the useful thing about them though is that they are very cold tolerant. I'm in Melbourne and it's midwinter, and this thrives outside. I think when it comes to care then, if you know where the orchid comes from, you can try and replicate the conditions as much as you can in your own home or in your own garden. A great place to look at that is orchidspecies.com, and then you follow that with the name of the orchid you're trying to find out about. I'll put the link below. That's a great place to find out where your orchid may come from in the first place and what kind of conditions it likes. Anyway, let's look at this baby here. I'm going to put it down because it's heavy. So, we've looked at where it comes from naturally. It's a lithophyte. It grows, clings to sort of rocky crevices. It likes dappled light, and it likes cool temperatures and a little bit of cool humidity. But again, it's certainly not fussy. So if you imagine that, the water that rushes past it gets absorbed quite quickly, but then drains away quite quickly. So the first thing to think about is the media you're potting it in. So like many orchids that need fast drainage, I just use quite a loose orchid mix and maybe mix it with a little bit of volcanic stone or some charcoal, perlite perhaps as well, whatever you can, just to loosen up that media a little bit and to allow fast drainage. Light. Now, once again, they like bright indirect light, so they're not great with direct sun. However, they do love a bit of morning sun, and they can take a bit more light in winter. And if you imagine in the southern hemisphere in Australia, the sun is quite low in winter, so there's more light penetration to these orchids in winter, and the cool temperatures and that winter light starts to stimulate the production of flower spikes, which we'll have a look at in a minute. So morning sun's okay, dappled light's great, filtered shade's okay, and a bit more winter light is okay as well, depending on where you are. They don't do well in super hot temperatures and super hot humidity, so much more of a cool climate orchid. And in terms of its growth, as you can see, it's quite a chunky little fellow, and it grows a bit like a vanda, so it kind of almost gets a stalk and starts to grow up. It will produce new growths from the bottom, which will spread out. And this one is reasonably old, but they form quite large specimens quite quickly. You can see that this one has got a little bit of war damage. I'll take some close-ups there. So I'm in a rental at the moment while our house is being renovated, so it's not getting ideal conditions. And last summer it got a little bit burnt, so no afternoon sun. Look, this is the little spot where it got burnt last summer, poor darling. Anyway, the leaves are tough and it recovered, but try and avoid direct afternoon sun if you can. And in winter it does need a bit of direct light to set the flower spike, so that's something else you've got to try and figure out as well. The great thing about these orchids is that they're really prolific flowerers, and can you see those flower spikes in there? And there's quite a large one coming out here, and there is one tucked in there. There's another little one tucked in here. And I did notice, there we go, right in the top there. So they are prolific, and as I mentioned, this doesn't have the perfect spot at the moment because we're in a rental. They often will have, well, this one's had 6, 7, 8 spikes, even more, and that's actually quite a good number this year though, so I'm not too disappointed. Water. A little often, good rule of thumb for all of us. Not too much and not too little. So it doesn't like to dry out completely. It doesn't want to be drenched. Imagine its conditions. It gets water that whooshes past quite quickly. It absorbs what it wants and the rest drains away. So if you can kind of replicate that, ease up a little bit in winter, give it a little bit more in summer, but they're pretty tough, I have to say. And I mean, you could almost, if you live in southern Australia, you could almost, or a similar climate, leave it under a tree and just let the natural weather conditions take care of it. However, don't let it get too wet in winter. So if you have got it outside and it's exposed, you might want to just put it under cover in winter. Feeding wise, pretty low key as well. I give it a fairly weak liquid fertilizer in the warmer months, so starting in spring, and I put a little bit of slow release fertilizer in it as well, just to give it that extra oomph. As you can see, I have got mine in a clay pot because I am a clay pot kind of guy, and it seems quite happy in that. But you could pot it in plastic pots, in free draining pots, in pots with holes. It doesn't really matter. The important thing is to make sure the media is correct, that its conditions are fine, and that it's watered properly. And then it doesn't really matter what you've got it in, I think. Now, I keep this outside all year. It's protected from rain, but it's out in the weather, and it can get quite cold in winter. But the cool temperature sets the flower spike, so it's quite important. So if you're somewhere where you need to grow it indoors, just try and replicate those conditions. So on a windowsill is great, where it can get reflected cool from the glass of the window and a little bit of morning sun and then afternoon protection. So bright indirect light, coolness in winter to set the flower spikes, not too wet, not too dry, and it should do very well, and it will do very well inside. Flowering time is early to late spring, and as you can see, it's August now, which is the last month of winter in Australia, and the flower spikes have really just started to become visible in the last month, so they set in quite early winter. So it's that late autumn, early winter chill and light and maybe a little bit of food that just gives the flower spikes a bit of an edge. There we are, plant lovers. Sarcochilus Orchids 101 from a rank amateur and an absolute beginner. So take everything I've said with a grain of salt, but they're so easy to grow and I really love them. The flowers are extraordinary. It's really prolific. It's very reliable. It can take a bit of rough treatment. This has kind of been through the mills with me, this one, but bless its heart, it's still here. So if you can find them wherever you are, give them a go. Really easy. And as I mentioned earlier on, there are some amazing hybrids now with really beautiful colors, more upright spikes, larger foliage, more pendant versions, all sorts of ones. So have a look, see if your orchid dealer of choice has got some, and don't be afraid. Super easy, not temperamental, and can live outside most of the year, depending on your climate. Now, thanks very much for watching. Click like and click subscribe if you want to hear more of my rank amateur musings on what I can and can't do, most of which I can't do. Anyway, thank you very much. Take care. It's COVID central in Melbourne at the moment, unfortunately, but I hope wherever you are, things are going well, and I'll see you next week.